Nobody in that prison had the slightest clue that the most dangerous man among them was sitting alone, tray of cheap chow in front of him, taking insults that would have been a death sentence for anyone else. At High Ridge State Pen, tucked away in the barren stretch of rural Arizona, the chow hall usually buzzed with muffled talk, trays scraping on steel, and the daily grind of pent-up hate. But in that moment, all the noise died, like the whole prison had just stopped breathing. Right in the middle, perched on a stainless steel table, black hair shadowing half his face, fork frozen mid-air, sat Kenji Sato, the new guy, transferred quietly out of a federal supermax in California. Nobody knew why. The COs weren't talking, the paperwork was sealed. Word on the yard was he'd killed a cop with his bare hands. Others whispered he'd been part of some cult, trained to be a living weapon, but Kenji hadn't said much since he'd landed here. 2 words, really, asking for a tray and asking where his cell was. That was it. In the chow hall, everything was about hierarchy, about predator and prey, and ruling at the top of the food chain was Brutus Cain, better known as Big Cain, unofficial king of D Block, a 6'7" wall of muscle, head shaved clean, tribal ink crawling down arms the size of telephone poles. Cain wasn't just feared, he was the system. If you wanted to last in High Ridge, you either bent the knee to Cain or you stayed invisible. Kenji did neither. Cain came up behind him like a freight train, his shadow swallowing the table whole. The clatter in the hall dropped to nothing. Everyone knew the drill. When Cain picked a target, you stood back and watched. It was like seeing a lion stalk a lamb, except this lamb, if you looked close enough, had teeth sharp enough to bite back. "Hey, princess." Cain's growl rolled out low, thick finger stabbing the air like a verdict. "You're in my seat." Kenji didn't even flinch. He chewed slow, swallowed, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, then finally lifted his gaze. No fear, no anger, just a cold, measured stare. "Didn't see your name on it." His voice was soft, but it cut like glass. The words hung in the air like a blade. Behind Cain, his boys, Mouse and Dread, shot each other wide-eyed looks. Nobody talked back to Big Cain. Especially not fresh meat. Cain stepped closer, the floor almost shaking under his boots. His finger drifted within inches of Kenji's face. Kenji stayed put, one hand on his tray, the other resting on his knee. Fork still in his grip, though it sure as hell wasn't for eating anymore. "You just signed up for the long road, kid," Cain muttered, voice dripping with barely bottled rage. "And I'm gonna drag you down every inch of it." What no one noticed were Kenji's eyes. They weren't pleading. They weren't panicked. They were measuring, calculating, reading Cain's shoulders, the hip shift, the swing of the arm. He wasn't reacting out of fear. He was waiting, like a predator biding its moment. On the wall, a camera blinked. Up in the tower, a guard hesitated, hand over the radio. He'd seen standoffs before, but something about this one felt different, heavier. "Last shot, sweetheart," Cain sneered. "Stand up and walk out before I tear you apart." Kenji finally set the fork down on the tray, and then nothing. 5 endless seconds ticked by. He just sat there, staring straight into Cain's eyes. Then, like a breath turning into wind, he slid to his feet. Quiet, fluid, like some ancient choreography. He didn't raise his fists, didn't square up, didn't shout, but anyone watching knew the fight had already begun. Cain grinned, cocky as ever, and wound back his fist. The hall held its breath. It never landed. Before his punch was halfway out, Cain's body twisted sideways with a bone-deep thud. Kenji had moved faster than anyone could track. An elbow to the neck, knee to the ribs, wrist snapped in one motion. Cain toppled like a felled tree. Dead silence. The inmates didn't know whether to bolt or bow. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. Kenji sat back down, picked up his fork, kept eating, calm as ever. Cain lay twitching on the floor, his crew frozen like they'd just seen a ghost walk through the chow hall. And in that instant, everybody knew. He wasn't just another inmate. He was a ticking time bomb, with a name and a countdown. High Ridge State Pen wasn't just a prison. It was a living, breathing organism, pulsing with rage, secrets, and unwritten codes. Sitting in the middle of Arizona's desert heartland, wrapped in razor wire fences and guard towers, it held over 1,000 inmates, killers, traffickers, mercenaries, men who had either lost the world outside or preferred the predictable brutality inside. Kenji Sato had been dropped into that system like a piece that didn't belong, and that's exactly why everyone was on edge. After the cafeteria incident, word spread like wildfire. Within an hour, every soul in D Block knew Big Cain had been dropped by a guy who hadn't even raised his voice. The legend of the new arrival grew with every retelling. Some swore he cracked 3 of Cain's ribs with a single kick. Others claimed he'd trained with monks in the Himalayas. The truth? Nobody really knew. But one man wanted answers. His name was Marcus Red Donovan, ex-military, now serving time for arms trafficking. Smart, sharp-eyed, Red ran an underground web of intel inside High Ridge. Sitting on his bunk with an old philosophy book in hand, he listened while his skinny cellmate Rico muttered, "Man, he dropped Cain like it was nothing. Didn't even break a sweat. Never seen anything like it." Red looked up from the pages, thoughtful. "Moves like that don't come cheap. That's discipline, training, either military or something rare. Martial arts most guys here never even heard of. But what the hell's a guy like that doing in here?" Red wasn't curious for fun. He knew High Ridge was a delicate balance, and Kenji had tilted the scale with a single move. Meanwhile, deep in D Block, Cain was being patched up. His pride hurt worse than his body. Face swollen, ego shattered, he sat on the cot grinding his teeth, eyes locked on the wall. A promise burned in his stare. "I'm gonna break that bastard. Slow." Out in the yard, inmates slipped back into routine while Kenji walked alone. His posture straight, eyes scanning everything, the cameras, the blind spots, the groups, the patterns, like a strategist mapping an invisible chessboard. He passed a bulletin board, a crumpled old newspaper clipping taped to it, red circle dismantled, martial arts master arrested in federal sting. Kenji's eyes lingered for a second. Then he kept walking. From the tower, veteran officer Jordan Ellis watched him with narrowed eyes. "That guy's not normal," Ellis muttered. "I've seen tough men come through here, but him, he's built to kill. No hesitation, no trail." "So why's he here then?" his partner asked, zooming the camera. Ellis didn't answer, but the question burned in his gut. High Ridge was already a pressure cooker, and Kenji Sato was the lit match tossed inside. Eyes were everywhere. Some saw Kenji as a threat, others an opportunity. Some wanted to recruit him, others erase him, but none of them truly understood who he was, not even Kenji. The silence in the chow hall wasn't the end. It was the start. By the next morning, High Ridge had shifted. Forced smiles, whispered words in the corridors. Gangs that never spoke traded glances, like deals were being stitched together in the prison's underworld. Cain's fall hadn't just humiliated him, it shook the entire ecosystem. And Kenji knew it. During yard time, while the rest grouped up, he kept his distance, not from fear, from strategy. Every step measured, eyes flicking to guard mirrors, blind alleys, gang clusters. He wasn't just a rookie anymore. He was a target. Cain wasn't stupid. He wouldn't swing again with his own hands. This time he wanted something bigger, a lesson, a show. That's when Malik Spade Rowe entered the picture, an ex-boxer locked up for manslaughter, and one of Cain's oldest allies. Spade was infamous for his temper and knockout fists. Nobody wanted him head-on, and he owed Cain. "You want him alive or just screaming?" Spade asked during yard break, sitting beside Cain. "He's gonna bleed," Cain growled, eyes fixed on the dirt. But not yet. First, we strip him of anything that makes him feel safe. Then we prove even a so-called master can't survive in hell. Meanwhile, Ellis dug deeper into prison records. No open files on Kenji, just a number. The details sealed, stamped by the FBI. His stomach turned. "This guy doesn't belong here," Ellis muttered, slamming the drawer shut. "Somebody planted him in High Ridge, and for a reason." In the prison's work wing, where inmates tore down electronics for corporate contracts, Kenji was reassigned. Coincidence? Not a chance. Spade was already there, along with Cain's crew. The trap was set. At first, it was small tests, accidental shoves, tools misplaced in his path. But Kenji didn't bite. He absorbed it all, like a predator lying in wait. His patience wasn't weakness, it was readiness. And then it came. During a supply move, Spade locked him in a maintenance room. A circle of inmates blocked the exits. No way out. "No rules now, champ," Spade whispered, fists tightening. "Let's see if that calm holds up when bones start snapping." Kenji didn't back down. His eyes swept the room in a flash. An oil-soaked rag, a loose hook on the wall, a wrench lying on the floor. 3 seconds later, the silence shattered. Spade charged like a bull. Kenji spun, precise as a blade, his elbow cracking Spade's jaw. Another man lunged from behind. Kenji pivoted, driving him into the wall, shoulder dislocated with surgical precision. The last one hesitated, iron bar in hand. Kenji didn't. The wrench cut through the air, bone snapping with a sound that echoed off the steel walls. By the time the guards burst in, 3 men were down, barely conscious. And Kenji? He sat on the floor, breathing hard, a thin line of blood trickling from his brow, but his eyes unshaken. Outside, the prison buzzed like a hornet's nest. Cain got the news within minutes. "He goes down," he snarled, "or this whole place becomes his." Red Donovan watched the storm building. He wasn't Kenji's ally, not yet, but he knew power when he saw it. And Kenji was bending the rules of a rotten world. Back in his cell, wiping the blood from his face, Kenji studied his reflection in a polished scrap of metal. And in Japanese he whispered, "Mu niha mu wo, demo shun niha lengjing wo." An eye for an eye, but a calm heart. The High Ridge Chow Hall, days later, felt like a stage set for a Cold War. Everybody was talking about Kenji Sato, some in awe, some in fear, plenty in anger. But what most didn't realize was that, behind the scenes of the prison, something far more dangerous than revenge was being hatched. In the admin wing, Officer Jordan Ellis finally got limited access to Kenji's file. What he read froze his blood. Name: Kenji Sato. Nationality: Japanese-American status. Former undercover operative, International Crime Task Force. Classification: highly trained. Lethal: above average strategic intelligence. Reason for incarceration: classified. Linked to a compromised operation involving a cartel and corrupt federal agents. He wasn't just another convict. He'd been shoved into the system like a disposable piece, a burned pawn tossed in by someone still with power. And Ellis knew, if Kenji survived long enough, someone out there would be very, very worried. Inside the prison, another piece was sliding into place. Red Donovan, always on the margins, had started moving closer to Kenji. First he watched, then he struck up conversations during the reading hours in the library. Kenji didn't talk much, but he didn't push Red away. "You're not here by accident," Red said quietly, tucked between the stacks with the old shelves muffling their voices. Kenji kept reading. "I saw it in your face, in that workroom. You didn't want to fight, but you knew you would have to." "If you already know that, why keep talking to me?" Kenji replied without looking up from the book. Red gave a short, knowing smile. "Because if you are who I think you are, you're the one who's gonna crack this place from the inside. And I want to be on your side when it happens." Kenji closed the book slowly. For the first time, he met Red's eyes with a steady gaze. "I'm not here to crack anything. I just want to get out in one piece." They both knew that was a lie. Across the yard, Cain was plotting his next move. The failed hit had exposed his weakness. The internal order was wobbling. Small crews who used to bow now hesitated, and hesitation in High Ridge smelled like blood. That's when Warden Halford stepped into the picture. A deep-voiced man in a dark suit, wearing the desert heat like armor, and a face carved out of stone. Halford didn't often visit D Block. That day he came down in person, flanked by 2 armed guards. He called Kenji into a secured room, biometric lock, closed door. "You stirred more in 3 days than some convicts do in years," Halford said, staring at a monitor showing footage of the fight. Kenji didn't answer. "I know who you are." "I know what you did," Halford went on. "But in here, identity means nothing. Power does. You get that?" Kenji breathed out. "If I got it, I'd have let Cain crush me on day 1. Halford stepped closer, eyes hard. "You think calm and technique will keep you alive? This is political theater. It's being watched, far away. Folks outside are betting you won't make it. Some want you dead, some want you exploded. No one's betting you leave alive." "And you?" Kenji asked. Halford gave a humorless smile. "I run the ring, the fight's yours." Meanwhile, in the grim walls of Cell 47, Spade, arm in a cast, was speaking with a man nobody had seen come in. A cartel courier slipped into the prison system. "He's the one, the Japanese, the same guy from that San Francisco sting, the one who vanished." "You sure?" "I know those eyes. He killed 2 of ours with his bare hands back then. The cartel wanted Kenji dead, and now they knew where to find him." The clock started running. It was the kind of early morning where the cold gets into your bones, and even ghosts hide in the corners. The prison, lulled in its daily grind of despair, barely sensed that something was about to happen. Something that would change everything. In Cell 42, Kenji sat still, eyes closed, breathing slow like he was listening to something no one else could hear. It wasn't meditation. It was preparation. He felt the imbalance in the air. He knew that night wouldn't end quietly. At 3:17 a.m., the lights flickered once, twice, and then died. Blackout. 5 seconds later, the emergency red lights kicked in, faint and pulsing, like the prison itself was bleeding. The security protocol engaged, doors locked, guards on alert. But what no one realized was that the blackout hadn't been an accident. In the control room, Officer Ellis stared at the monitors in a panic. Cameras were cut, comms were failing. Something had breached the system. From inside. It wasn't a bug. It was an external code, the tech said, fingers trembling over the keyboard. "We're being hacked. Surgically. Like somebody knew exactly where to touch." In D Block, noises started. A hiss, then a whistle. Then the metallic scrape of something being dragged. A body. In the corridor, a guard was found dead. Precise cuts to the throat. Uniform clean. Nothing taken except his access card. And then the truth came out. This wasn't a riot. This wasn't a breakout. It was an execution operation. Men planted among the inmates, cartel operatives, hired hitmen, bought mercenaries, had one mission: eliminate Kenji Sato. They'd stop at nothing. From the tower, Ellis barked into his radio, "Code Black," repeating, "Code Black. Target is inmate KS-42. Repeat, Kenji Sato is under coordinated attack." But it was too late. In Cell 42, the electric door clicked open. 3 men stepped in, wearing ordinary inmate clothes, but moving with military precision. One spoke in Spanish. "The cartel sends its regards. Let's finish this quick," Kenji answered, voice low. "You should have brought more men." The fight that followed was brutal, silent, real. Kenji moved like water, fluid and devastating. An arm was broken. A neck popped out of place. The third man drew a makeshift blade and slashed into Kenji's side. Blood ran hot down his ribs. Kenji didn't fall. He grabbed the attacker's arm, twisted, and drove him into the wall with the knife lodged in him. The man's eyes dimmed. Kenji dropped to his knees, gasping, the wound deep. He clamped it with a ripped towel. The corridor remained dark, but the tension was total. The cartel had found him, and they'd sent killers. Elsewhere in the prison, Red Donovan heard the alarm and understood immediately. He sprinted to the library, grabbed his hidden pirate radio, and tuned to the frequency Ellis had given him months earlier for favors. "You seeing this?" Red asked into the mic. "They want him dead." Ellis's voice came ragged and low. "The prison's compromised. Corrupt agents on the upper floors. The order isn't to capture, it's to execute. And it's bigger than the cartel. There are powerful people in this. Government, justice, the FBI." Red felt the weight of the world drop on him. He's been planted to die, and now he's alone. But Kenji wasn't as alone as that call made it sound. In the medical wing, a young nurse named Alicia Monroe, someone who'd watched Kenji from a distance but never spoken to him, heard the emergency radio and saw his name flash red on the panel. Priority target. Order, neutralize. She knew exactly what that meant. For the first time in years, she broke protocol. She ran toward D Block, slipped past the chaos and guards, grabbed a first aid kit and an access card from a colleague who'd been knocked out, and kept going. When she reached Kenji lying in the corridor, sweating, pale, she hesitated for a beat, then dropped to her knees. "Stay with me. Just hold on. I don't know who you are, but they're not killing you here." Kenji, barely conscious, opened his eyes and for the first time smiled. "You're the first one to say that in years." She started to staunch the wound. Boots echoed down the hall. They were coming, but now Kenji was not alone. The D-block corridor still glowed under the pulse of the emergency lights when Alicia Monroe finished stitching Kenji's wound with improvised surgical thread, her hands shaking. Blood still seeped, but slower now. Kenji was conscious, weak, but hanging on. Down the hall, the sound of boots echoed, guards, or maybe more assassins hidden in uniform. With effort, Alicia dragged him into a shuttered maintenance room, threw a blanket over him, and shoved the medical kit under a shelf. A security camera swiveled in the corner, but didn't catch them. Not yet. She leaned back against the wall, chest heaving, staring at the man who until tonight had been nothing more than a distant figure among the inmates. "Why are they after you?" she asked, not expecting an answer. "Why do they want you gone so badly?" Kenji met her eyes. Pain carved across his face, but his voice came steady. "Because I know too much, and because they couldn't control me." That was all she needed to hear. They weren't just hunting a man, they were trying to bury a secret, and Kenji was the last living witness. Up in the tower, Ellis paced like a caged animal. Chaos everywhere. 2 guards dead, cameras down, and an order from above. Eliminate inmate KS-42, no traces, no records. Ellis wasn't a saint. He'd looked away from deals, let things slide. But this crossed a line, and someone was striking matches right on it. He grabbed the radio. "Red, listen up. You want to walk out of this place alive, protect the Japanese. If he dies, we all die with him, one way or another." In the North Wing, Cain heard about the assassination attempt with a mix of fury and dread. He hadn't greenlit it. His plan was to break Kenji down, not have him executed with military precision. "They're turning this guy into a damn legend," he roared, slamming his fist against the wall. "If he makes it through one more night, I've got no throne left to sit on." Beside him, Spade, arm still in a cast, kept silent. For the first time, real fear flickered in his eyes. He survived 3 of our best, and now he's being hunted by the system itself. This isn't prison beef anymore, Cain. This is Cold War. Cain glared at him. "Then let it freeze. They can all die frozen for all I care." Meanwhile, Red Donovan was already moving. He found an old maintenance access linking C Block and D. Filthy, forgotten, not logged in the prison's digital maps. He grabbed a blanket, a hidden pocket knife, and a roll of gauze. Minutes later, he found Alicia and Kenji holed up in the storage room. Kenji's eyes opened at the sight of him. "You came. You pulled me out once. Now it's my turn not to overthink it." "That's stupid," Kenji said with a half-smile. "Maybe, but we'll make it out alive, or raise hell trying." Alicia finished bandaging and handed Red a spare medical keycard. "Take him to the infirmary. I'll stall the logs, wipe the traces. But you need to vanish before morning count, or it's over." "And you?" Red asked. She took a sharp breath. "If they catch me, I'll say I was taken hostage." Kenji gave her a silent look of gratitude. For once, someone wasn't using him as a weapon or a shield. She just wanted him to live. At 4:11 a.m., Red and Kenji slipped into the maintenance tunnel. The prison seemed calm, but it was a lie. Guards swept the blocks. Dogs prowled the halls. In his office, Warden Halford spoke into a scrambled call. "He's still alive. They didn't finish the job." A cold voice on the other end answered, "Then finish it, before he talks, before San Francisco comes to light." Halford hung up, eyes fixed on the D-block feed. "You should have died in that fire, Kenji. Now you're gonna burn with the rest." The tunnel stank of rust and mildew, chains rattling with each step. Red guided Kenji through the maze with the precision of someone who knew its blind spots. At the exit, a rusty grate groaned, revealing the infirmary like a fragile island of salvation. Alicia ushered Kenji onto a makeshift cot. Dim lights, outdated meds, nothing ideal. But what mattered was time. They had minutes before the absence was noticed. "Can you walk?" Red asked, never loosening his grip. Kenji propped himself on an elbow, winced at the pain, then grinned through a smear of blood. "I can, and I'll fight tomorrow." It wasn't bravado, it was a promise. And in this place, promises were paid in sweat. Alicia worked with steady hands, tight dressings, rationed painkillers, clipped instructions. Red mapped the prison in his mind, routes, dead zones, predictable guard rotations. Strategy rose like a rough sketch of insurgency. That night, while the prison slept under tension, Kenji started training again. Not to prove anything, but to rebuild. To turn survival into preparation. His movements were slow but precise, each breath measured. Red and Alicia watched, learning with every strike, every breath. "You breathe wrong when you go in," Red muttered, voice like an old drill sergeant. "It's not strength that burns you out, it's disorder," Kenji corrected with a small adjustment, body obeying despite the pain. The weapon he once was becoming something else, not vengeance but discipline, not rage but control. In the days that followed, Kenji shifted from hunted prey to the nerve center of resistance. He refused easy alliances. Instead, he built a lean network. Red handled routes and contacts. Alicia doctored the records, and a handful of minor inmates, a retired electrician named Hank, a former driver called Luis, did the grunt work. Tools, shifts, blind spots. Each small job was a test. A dog lured away with scraps. A camera blinded for 5 minutes. A ventilation shaft timed to the guard's smoke break. High Ridge wasn't just concrete, it was routine, and routine could be broken. With each success, Kenji gained something beyond respect, credibility. Inmates who once muttered in corners now watched differently. Some offered contraband, blades, shivs. Kenji refused most. He only wanted the bare minimum to stay ahead. But growth never runs smooth. During an op to lift the digital logs, Hank was caught. One sharp-eyed guard, one mistake. Hank was dragged to solitary. Kenji felt the guilt like iron on his chest. He couldn't lose people. Not again. That failure became the spark. Instead of rage, Kenji turned methodical. He trained for Hank's rescue, timed distractions, shadow routes, vents. On a cold, windy night, Kenji and Red pulled Hank out of isolation with surgical precision. Hank was broken but breathing. When he rasped a thank you against Kenji's shoulder, loyalty shifted inside the block. something new was born. Through it all, Kenji let pieces of his past slip, not full confessions, just fragments. A ship's name, a date, a torn photo. Red pieced them together. The San Francisco op, the truth Kenji carried. To Alicia, he showed something else. Not the fighter, but the healer. He taught her pressure holds, bleeding stops. She gave back in small rebellions, extra food, delayed checkups, misfiled reports, little risks that stacked into survival. The turning point came when Cain tried a mass strike to retake power. Kenji didn't wait. He countered with choke points, locked doors, planted misinformation. Cain walked into his own trap. The battle never went public. Instead, Cain was exposed, forced to retreat, pride bleeding worse than his wounds. The hierarchy cracked. That night, Kenji sat on a rooftop ledge, bandages still damp. Red joined him in silence. Alicia handed him water. The quiet wasn't empty, it was heavy with purpose. Kenji had changed. He wasn't just a fighter anymore, he was a strategist. A man shaping survival into something larger, and deep down, something sharper formed. A promise honed like steel in the dark. "When this is over," Kenji murmured, eyes on the concrete horizon, "I want answers." "And if you don't like what you find?" Red asked. "Then we burn the board." Time had shifted at High Ridge, not by the hands on a clock, but by the weight in the air. Something was about to break, and everyone felt it, the way guards patrolled with palms resting on their holsters, the way inmates whispered without making eye contact, the food coming out colder, the hallways quieter, the cameras more awake. Kenji could feel the noose tightening, but he wasn't reacting anymore. He was calculating. The board was set. Alicia had confirmed the digital surveillance logs were altered 3 times in the past week, always at midnight, always by an outside source. The same source that greenlit his transfer to High Ridge. Someone inside the system, powerful and terrified the truth might surface. In Red's cell, maps sketched with stolen pens on toilet paper took shape. Key sectors, servers, generators, comms, shift changes, dead zones. The entire prison now was a puzzle with one solution: expose the conspiracy and get out alive. But first, Kenji had debts to settle. At lunch, he sat at Cain's table, alone. Fork stopped. Silence. Cain, face still bruised from the last humiliation, set his tray down slowly. 4 of his men flanked him. He didn't move. Kenji spoke low, barely above a breath. "You won't stop me. Not you. Not the cartel, not the warden. You still have a choice: fall or be dragged." Cain smirked, then leaned in. "You think you're different from me, Sato? In the end, we feed on the same thing: war." Kenji met his eyes. "I fight for truth. You just survive. And that is ending." No raised voice, no table slam, no scene. Kenji stood and walked away. What stayed behind was a vacuum of power, of control, of fear. Cain didn't react, because he knew. Kenji wasn't an opponent anymore. He was a sentence, and it was closing in. In the admin wing, Ellis kept digging, hidden files, encrypted tags, correspondence between Halford and one name, Vance LaRoque, a disappeared former federal agent tied to the San Francisco op that sealed Kenji's fate. Routed to High Ridge. Confirmation that the asset is no longer of use. Clearance granted for termination via internal event. Signed, LaRoque. Kenji hadn't just been betrayed. He'd been condemned to a legal-looking execution. And now Ellis had proof, enough to topple a network if he could get it out. He also knew the price. If they caught him, he wouldn't see sunrise. In the infirmary, Alicia prepped the last piece, a flash drive hidden in a pill bottle packed with everything Ellis and Red had compiled. The plan was clean. Kenji and Red would hit the comms tower. Ellis would trigger an emergency protocol to create a system fault. Alicia would fire the data out through an external uplink, then wipe everything, or die trying. The countdown started there. "You sure?" Alicia asked, meeting Kenji's eyes one last time before go time. The only thing I'm sure of, he said without hesitation, is that if this keeps going, other people die in my place. I can't let that happen. Not again. At 11:54 p.m., Red cleared the last checkpoint with a forged badge. Ellis keyed in the final commands. Alicia set the medical decoy. And Kenji, uniform clean, eyes full of scars, stared up the stairwell to the tower. Every step was a decision. Up top, Halford was on the phone. The execution failed. Sato's alive. The answer came back like a knife. Then finish it. No mistakes. Last chance. Or you go down with him. Halford hung up, drew his sidearm, glanced at the camera. Kenji was coming. The tower stairs groaned like a broken piano note. Each rung brought Kenji closer to the source of power and the poison. Wind cut through the metal slats. The desert city glowed far off like a cold chessboard. Inside, cables and screens blinked. The room smelled like steel and stale coffee. Kenji went up with Red close behind, steps precise. The forged badge trembled in Red's hand. His face was pale but set. Ellis crackled in their earpieces from a dark room, steering them. The plan was surgical. Every second mattered. Alicia slotted the flash drive into the softest terminal. Digits bled across the monitor. An upload pushed to a safe contact. An investigative reporter out of state, a throwaway line Ellis had secured months ago. The file held names, emails, video, enough proof to set a whole city on fire. "Go!" Ellis hissed. "Now!" The transfer crawled, 10%, 25%, 49%, and then a siren rose, like the building knew it was under attack. Halford ended his call, eyes cold. "They're on the stairs," he said, almost bored. Cain led a crew up the service corridor, hungry-eyed. Halford had promised the final strike would come from inside, blood to fix his mistake. Cain saw glory waiting on the other side of the door. Both men believed violence could solve it. The first hit was brutal. Door blown, bodies slammed, a flash of blades. Red yanked Kenji behind cover. Impact, fists, chains, flesh cracking against steel. Kenji fought like a scalpel, short movements, no waste. Every man who dropped was a problem routed, not a grudge settled. In the chaos, Halford appeared in the doorway, coat open, gun in hand. His voice sliced the room. "You should have died in the San Francisco fire, Sato. Since you didn't, you'll pay, and I'll wash my name clean." Kenji didn't answer. He closed the distance. They collided in a near-choreographed blur. Halford with the gun, Kenji with intent. A shot rang. It pinged off a metal housing, flaring sparks from a screen. Another shot. The tower hummed like a tuning fork. Red shouted. One of Cain's men went down in the hall, betrayal stamped on his face. Cain surged like an animal. Halford fired again. With each bullet, Alicia's upload stuttered. 71%, 82%, 93%. When Halford stepped back to reload, Kenji launched. Intent and execution fused. Hand to hand, no flourish. Kenji folded the warden with a clean body shot. Halford's skull clipped the rack. He reeled. Red wrenched the pistol loose. Cain roared, charging as a last resort. That's when Ellis made his call. A private security squad, men in the warden's vests, stormed the stairwell, led by a stranger no one recognized. Vance LaRocque. The signature in the files, the outside man who'd signed the release. He stepped in with a smile too wide and eyes that forgave nothing. "Heard you were already dust, Sato," LaRocque crooned. "Shame you weren't." "Truth's more fun face to face." The room froze. The upload jittered, 98%, 99%. LaRocque spun the official story. Kenji, rogue mercenary, Halford, dutiful public servant. Every word was poison, prepped and measured. But mid-speech, a window popped, an unintended leak, a protocol hiccup, and a clip Alicia hadn't meant to send kicked loose. Shaky video of Halford and LaRocque behind closed doors, swapping papers, shaking hands, tallying payouts. It was enough. What followed wasn't silence. It was a roar. Alicia's blast went wide. Emails, videos, ledgers, payments to politicians, fake contracts. The reporter's feed lit up. The bar hit 100%. LaRoque realized too late. "This won't stand," he shouted, but it already had. Alerts pinged across newsrooms, inboxes, mirrored servers that wouldn't ever go dark. The lie started to bleed. Panicking, LaRoque drew. Cain's men shoved forward. Halford staggered up, power leaking through his fingers. Chaos spread like an open wound. In the control room, Ellis watched the feeds erupt. He knew if he lived, he'd be at the eye of the storm. He gave a dry smile, then threw a lever, torching the local archives to protect the distributed dump, even if it meant losing trails that could snake to others. A calculated sacrifice. A stray round found Ellis. He went down, a thin smile on his lips, as if he'd planned for this too. Kenji saw him fall, the one man who'd pushed for justice from inside that hell, and something in him turned inside out. LaRoque leveled his gun. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Kenji could have ended it right there, pulled the trigger, cut the head off the snake. But the edge inside him wasn't just vengeance, it was principle. He made a different move, one that changed the trajectory. He stripped LaRoque's weapon, yanked him forward, and shoved him in front of the live cameras. "Talk. Say who sent you. Say the names." His voice was low and merciless. Cornered, LaRoque managed a broken smile, the kind men wear when they still think death beats exposure. "You won't get it. It's bigger than you. It's the system. It doesn't stop," he muttered. The camera didn't care. The files were already with journalists, prosecutors, former colleagues. The truth no longer belonged to the tower. It was public, combustible. Before the smoke cleared, a new sound cut through. Helicopters. Lights in the sky, sirens outside. For the first time, it felt like the world beyond the walls was moving. Kenji looked at Halford, at LaRoque, at Cain, at Red and Alicia. Spent. He felt the weight of what had been done and what still had to be. He didn't smile. He only whispered to himself, "It's not over." And the prison, which had breathed nothing but fear for so many nights, swallowed a new noise, messages pouring in, alerts popping, running footsteps. The truth had leaked. The game had changed, but in the corners where rot feeds, the question hung, who would pay, who would fall first? High above, the camera panned. The lens caught Kenji's face, bloody and calm, like a single candle set in the desert, burning so bright for a heartbeat that everyone could see. Then the scene snapped, sirens, shouts, lights, the world turning inside out. The climax had detonated, the board was broken. What came next would come later. 2 days later, High Ridge Penitentiary was under federal control. Outside, forces had taken over. Old guards were removed, interrogated, replaced by agents flown in from out of state. The name Kenji Sato now lived in prosecutors' folders, journalists' headlines, late-night podcasts, and the ticker on midnight news shows. But inside the prison, the war hadn't ended with sirens. Cain was transferred quietly. Destination unknown. No inmate dared to ask. His reign ended not with screams, but with silence, the kind that follows fallen kings and forgotten traitors. Halford was arrested that morning. His face hit the news for a few hours, then vanished, buried under lawyers, press releases, threats, and backroom deals. The system was doing what it always did, covering its tracks. LaRoque disappeared. After the collapse, he was taken into protective custody. Rumors said he'd been slipped into a witness program. Others swore he was dead. But Kenji knew better. Monsters rarely vanish. They just hide in new skins. At the maximum security hospital, Kenji recovered under watch. Not as an inmate, but as a volatile asset. The government didn't know what to do with him. Releasing him was dangerous. Keeping him locked up, even worse. Red Donovan had cut a deal, transferred to a transition unit with a real shot at early release. When he said goodbye to Kenji, he kept it short. "You changed this place. Don't know if it's for better or worse, but you changed it," Kenji nodded. For the first time, he saw something unexpected in Red's eyes: hope. Alicia, on the other hand, slipped out of the system, resigned hours after the op. No complaint, no scandal. She just walked away. In the pocket of the jacket she'd worn while patching Kenji up, she left a handwritten note. "You survived. Now, live." That's enough of a revolution for a start. In a clean cell, lit by a small window, Kenji stared at the night sky. Technically, he was still a prisoner, but for the first time in years, he no longer felt the weight of a lie on his back. He had done the impossible, survived an execution, exposed the truth, and cracked part of an invisible system, but he also knew the real war waited outside, and he wasn't finished. 6 months later, a bus terminal camera in Nevada caught a man in a ball cap, scar on his arm, eyes steady. Just a backpack and a new name. No one saw when he boarded. No one knew it was Kenji Sato. That same night, in a sleek DC office, an anonymous email landed in a senator's inbox. "You were next on the list. I saw you in San Francisco. I'm coming." No system is safe, not even outside the walls. And what if the truth was locked up with the criminals? What if the heroes were silenced and the villains wore badges? The story of Kenji Sato isn't just about survival. It's about resistance. About the cost of defying invisible systems, and about what happens when someone refuses to be erased. If this story gripped you until the very last second, share it. Comment what you would do in his place, and ask yourself, would you have the courage to take on the system, knowing it could cost you everything?